Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today I'm here with fourth year psychology specialist. She's actually doing a double specialist. Victoria Gracie, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. I was always interested in body image. I had a few other interests too. I ended up finding a laboratory that studied BDD and anorexia specifically, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. Honestly, U of T was where I first explored being a model even. When I was younger, I never really thought about my body. I'd say probably most of us don't. When we're little kids, we're running around, we're doing things, we're having fun. I don't think about how we look, maybe our parents force us to wear something pretty, but when I got into the ballet industry more so, when I got deeper into it, that's when it started becoming the case of, you need to lose weight. Body positivity, I would say, it started off as a good mindset. Think positively about your body. We tend to have a negative skew in how we view ourselves. We tend to be preoccupied. We shouldn't be preoccupied with this. As a mindset, I think it's really great. That being said, it gradually turned into a movement. Some people don't really care for big hips. Some people like small hips. Victoria's Secret supermodels obviously had the smaller hips. Many people thought they were gorgeous. I sure did when I was a little girl, and many men did as well too. So then also there's many men who like Kim Kardashian, for example. It's something that in terms of attraction is very integrated into what you like.
In 2025, who do you think is that ideal figure today?
Ooh.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the VoV podcast, Voices of Vic. Today I'm here with fourth year psychology specialist. She's actually doing a double specialist, which is wild. Victoria Gracie, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. This podcast is centered at Victoria College. Surprisingly, we've done, I think we're probably past, by the time this is out, we'll probably be past 100 episodes. Ooh. We have yet to have a guest named Victoria on the podcast. You're the first one.
Sweet. I know. I was like made to go here, right?
Absolutely.
It's such a beautiful college too.
It is very nice. It is very nice. So tell me a bit about yourself. I want to start off. We have a lot to talk about here today. You're big in fashion. You're a speaker. And you do all sorts of interesting work that not, the typical U of T student might not even have the time to do. But for some reason, you've managed to find that time to fit in all this other stuff. But to start off, you're doing a double specialist. I've heard of psychology. I have not heard of exceptionality in human learning. So if you want to break that down for us here, what is exceptionality in human learning?
Oh, 100%. A lot of people haven't heard of it here because it's a UTM-based program.
Got it.
I believed it was started by a man named Stuart Kamenetsky, who's currently my prof, really cool guy who started the program. And it's all about really like studying disabilities for the most part and studying different learning styles and how we can really restructure, say, our current education system to consider the different psychological needs of those with disabilities, whether it be physical, intellectual, you name it there. So really cool program, different from what I'm actually pursuing in a sense because I do research, say, more on the neuroscience end of things, but definitely also informative at the same time.
Okay.
And a lot of courses there that really spanned and say anthropology, biology, and that really piqued my interest outside of just the psychology route.
Absolutely.
So really amazing program we have there. It's only at UTM, shockingly. I know it really should be expanded because it's quite popular.
100%. Very interesting. Okay, so I would guess, does it align somewhat with psychology? Because I'd have to assume that a double specialist would be insanely difficult to do if the courses were too different.
Absolutely. So for myself, I'm graduating with about 21 credits. So I'm not that much over. And honestly, I didn't have to graduate with 21 credits. There's a few first year courses during my first year. I was like, I'm going to try out drama studies. No regrets. Such a fun time, right? But for my program, I technically didn't need to do drama studies, for example. So definitely there's a lot of aligning because exceptionality has a lot of psychology courses in there. So because it's so psychology focused, there's of course that overlap. You just got to plan it out and structure it right. There's a little more flexibility in the psych program, I'll say, in terms of what courses you can take. If you plan it out accordingly, spend many hours on those degree planners, eventually you can kind of work out, okay, this is how I can do a double specialist without going 7 years at U of T.
There you go. Absolutely. How are you feeling about graduating after all this time?
Ooh, it feels different.
Yeah.
I guess you could say it's one of those transitions, right? It's a bit anxiety provoking,
Yep.
but it's also exciting at the
100%.
same time, right?
100%.
The two in there together. So it's like, it's a pivot. It's a pivot to a new beginning,
Yep.
I'll say. So
Absolutely.
yeah, sure, I still want to pursue what I'm currently doing, but at the same time, now it's a different stage of life,
Right.
right? And I'm sure you could relate because you're also going to be graduating here
100%,
too.
100%. Yeah, it's a tough pivot to make. It's like that
yeah.
dichotomy you're talking about, exciting, nervous. This happens
Yeah.
all the time when you ask a high school kid what are their thoughts on going to university. Excited, nervous. It's both.
Yeah.
It's just anxiety, positive and negative. So very interesting.
Absolutely.
But I am interested, before we get too deep into all the other interesting stuff you do, if you had to recommend, I wouldn't say recommend, but maybe just say for yourself, what has made your experience at U of T a positive one or a valuable one? Because there are some things that, every student does. We go to courses, we study, we do homework, kind of talk to some people here and there. But if you really want an exceptional experience where maybe you do some things that, not all students do, what would you say are some of those things that you've been able to do?
Ooh, I'd say just in general, in a very broad sense, the opportunity. There's a lot of opportunities here, right? So I'm at UTM campus.
Yeah.
I'm from Mississauga, so it made logical sense for me to go 15 minutes away from where I live
Right.
For my courses. And there's courses, programs there. But at the same time, there's different research spaces. So yes, there are some at U of T, or UTM, I should say, but there's also a lot downtown, right? So like, say, for example, if you're in more of the psychology, biology space,
Yeah.
you could work at Sick Kids.
Yeah.
You could work at University Health Network. You could work down at CAMH, where I'm at.
Yeah.
There's a whole variety. And with that, there's a lot of professors. There's a lot of different research areas.
Yeah.
I was always interested in body image. I had a few other interests too, like post-traumatic stress disorder. I have a close relative who happens to have PTSD. So for me, I was like, see the impact of this. This is something really important to be studied. For myself, I have body dysmorphic disorder. My mother does too. So I ended up finding a laboratory that studied BDD and anorexia specifically. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And that really put me down a new field of saying, yeah, like, I've lived with this. I've seen this condition. I've been in industries that, have put a lot of pressure on body image wise. Now I can research it too.
Yeah.
And my laboratory is one of the very few in Canada that actually studies BDD. So it's quite the place to be honest, for all of those opportunities. We also have different things. So like for myself, in terms of clubs and activities, fashion shows, U of T charity fashion show.
Yep.
Really amazing.
Absolutely.
Lovely experience. I've done a lot of professional runways now. Sometimes I can't believe it's university charity fashion show. I've been to some professional runways that are not as big as U of T charity fashion show, which is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. Last year was in Windsor Arms Hotel.
Yeah.
Oh, insane. Beautiful. Honestly. So there's a whole lot of different opportunities, and I'm sure there's tons outside of whatever interest may be. Honestly, U of T was where I first explored being a model even too. I started out with also a beautiful show, UTM charity fashion show.
Yep.
Did it for fun. Really horrible walk. Did not know how to be a model. I was not an A+ model at all that time, but that really pivoted me into getting into that industry. So coming into U of T, I had some things going for me for sure, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And because there was such an abundance of opportunity, you can just dip into little bits of everything here and there.
That's right. Absolutely. And you're talking about there's a few things I want to expand on here. So you're talking about you kind of grew up in certain spaces or fields, industries, whatever you want to call it. I'd say spaces might be the best term that, really push a very specific body image. So I know just from watching some of your stuff that ballet was one of them that you kind of grew up in, and you kind of give the story in your talks here, in your TEDx talks for U of T. You're saying how, like, they were saying that everything about your body was too big except for, ironically, your hips or your hips, your waist,
waistline.
Your
so
waist.
Close, very
That's
close
what it
there.
is. Sorry, your waist. And for you, it was like your waist was like the one thing that you didn't think was that big an issue that you didn't care about, and it's very interesting. So I guess that your come up in those spaces. How did this struggle with body image kind of start?
Yeah, I would say, when I was younger, I never really thought about my body. I'd say probably most of us don't. For the most part, when we're little kids, we're running around, we're doing things, we're having fun. We don't think about how we look. Maybe our parents force us to wear something pretty, but that's on them. We don't care about those things, 100%. Right? So for me, I never really looked at my body too much. I never really thought much about it, nothing in particular, for example, just thought normal, whatever, fine. But when I got into the ballet industry more so, when I got deeper into it, that's when it started becoming a case of, yeah, like you need to lose weight. You need to fix this part. You need
And
to
how old
fix
were you
that
then?
part. Oh, I was around when that started. I was about 11 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, around 11 when I got more seriously into it. I
Yeah.
did ballet before, but more deeply into it when I was 11.
Got it.
So that started there, and then I started actually thinking about how my body looked, for example. And you know, it's not bad to think about how you look, not at all. But I was thinking of it in a negative connotation and to an extreme extent, like
Right.
overly thinking about it.
Yeah.
It was occupying to me. And like you said, like the one thing that I was told was fine about me was my waist. And that was the one thing that bugged me the most,
Yeah.
very ironically. So it goes to show that really triggered me thinking more about how I looked and really focusing on it and focusing on what's wrong. But the specifics of what was wrong and what I was told was wrong wasn't actually what I necessarily was most concerned with.
Yeah.
I can't explain why. I genuinely don't know why, but it was more, I guess, of a push for me to fixate on how I looked, to try to fix how I looked
Yeah.
for the industry.
Yeah.
And that led me to being overly fixated on how I looked. Even going to school, like I could not wear certain outfits, certain clothing items. If I thought, say, for example, if I thought a t-shirt was baggy, I could never go outside wearing a baggy t-shirt. I thought my classmates would think I was pregnant or something at about 11 years old. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you know? So ridiculous thoughts like that, but ironically, in many ways, normal for many people at the same time.
100%,
So that was
100%.
kind of how that all rose for me in the ballet industry.
There you go. So that was the detail. Sorry, I butchered that detail. It was
Oh,
the
no
waist
worries.
that they said was good, but you then looked at it and was like, no,
Yeah.
I actually don't agree.
Yeah.
And you can't explain why. You have no idea.
Yeah, not exactly why it would be specifically my waist,
Yeah.
but it was my one area
Yeah.
that I was especially concerned with.
Very interesting. Okay, so this is going back so you were 11. This is a while ago. And I feel like the body positivity kind of movement started a little bit later than that, or at least it became more popular after you were 11 years old. There wasn't really, I feel like it's almost like a political issue now, right? So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how do you think the body positivity like push has evolved from that? Because I've talked about it on here with this podcast before with other guests, how I think that it started in a very wholesome way, but then it also, it unfortunately transformed into something where we were promoting like bad, objectively unhealthy body standards, right? Yeah. So I think there's an interesting balance there between, accepting yourself, but then also not saying that, a physically unhealthy state is good. Right?
Yeah.
What do you think about that balance?
Absolutely. So with body positivity, I really started out. So I got a little bit worse when I was 13 years old in terms of how I felt about my body. And then I would say I transitioned out of that. My dad said, you got to get out of the ballet. Like, you got to take a break from this or switch dues or do something at least, because this is not productive. This is not healthy. This is not good.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful that he recognized that, because then I was like, okay, definitely need to take my step back now from this. Both my parents were really supportive in that. And then I ended up exploring into my own kind of depth in my own little world of body positivity around, I want to say I was about 15. Okay. When I was 14, I went to the world's largest ballet competition. It's called Youth America Grand Prix. And I did it after I was told I'd never be able to because of my body. Yeah. So for me, I was like, yes, I'm going to go on the stage and show that you can do this with any body type. And that was nothing absurd. You absolutely can. And I think it is absurd that in industries like ballet that we say, you cannot do ballet if you're a certain body type. Ballet is exercise. Ballet is good for you.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Why would we discourage that? That is insane
100%,
to me.
100%.
So I kind of got into that space a little bit more, especially when I became around 15 years old. And I didn't do Sign Side too much because I was 15 years old. I looked at the more so the movement. And it started off from a very wholesome place, like you mentioned, too. And at the end of the day, that wholesomeness still exists, right? Of course. If someone's bigger, they should not be seen as less than of a human being. And body positivity, I would say, it started off as a good mindset, right? So think positively about your body. We tend to have a negative skew in how we view ourselves. We tend to be preoccupied. We shouldn't be preoccupied with this. We should be able to, go out there, explore things, not hold ourselves back because, we think we look bad because Instagram told us we did. Right? So it started off with that. And as a mindset, I think it's really great. I think it's great to have that mindset.
Absolutely.
That being said, it gradually turned into a movement.
Right.
Where it became less so about, okay, let's have this mindset and use it more, say, in a clinical setting as well. Let's try to encourage a positive skew in how we see ourselves, while also improving ourselves too, and recognizing where we can improve, but not being fixated to the point of dwelling on where we are wrong in some type of way.
Absolutely.
We're actually not wrong in any type of way for that. But it just became more of a movement, like you said, kind of political in a sense. Right? Where we started moving away from, it's good to have a mindset and good to be more positive and good to, take action and, feel good about yourself and not being ashamed of who you are and think you're less than a person because of how you look.
Right.
But rather it turned into, okay, but if you don't think like this, you are a really bad person.
Right.
If you're not positive, you have something inherently in you that's negative, and that makes you a really nasty, mean person.
That's right.
Which is absurd. So now it's actually holding people up to a standard in and of itself.
That's right. That's right.
Very ironically speaking.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And it gets really crazy. I did actually give a third TED Talk. My third one was at TEDx Queens U. And I dived into that a little bit. I dived into self-perception, but I also dived into the debate of body positivity and body neutrality. So body neutrality is the whole idea of, we shouldn't be positive about our bodies, but instead we should just remove all emotional affect.
Interesting.
Not think about our bodies. Say, we're happy for how they function. I'm not going to think about how my waist looks. I'm just going to forget about it. I'm glad I'm breathing. I'm thankful for my breath. I'm not going to think about how my stomach looks whatsoever. Just neutral ground. Is that possible?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask.
Possible?
Is that possible? It seems like, I don't know how far you can really push yourself to delude yourself into not, considering it a little bit.
Exactly. And on the end of, is it possible? You could also ask, is it healthy to even try?
Good point. Good
right?
point. Yeah.
Because naturally we do perceive ourselves. Right? And if you look more in terms of a historical perspective, more of an anthropological view, and we don't have all the answers for this, of course, we can't interview, our old ancestors way back in the caveman times, but there's some basis in terms of how we perceive ourselves and survival. Maybe seeing yourself as smaller than what you are would make you less likely to go after a big bear thinking you would survive. And that's why those people saw themselves as smaller survived, for example. Not saying that's true. We don't really know. But there's different hypotheses out there as to why we perceive ourselves a little differently, why we think about how we look, and all of that. So is it really healthy to not think about it? Possible. Hard. Yeah, definitely. So I feel like personally there's this kind of middle ground between body positivity and saying you have to think about your body in this way and always be positive constantly 24/7 or else you are a horrible person because you don't fit an ideology.
That's right. Yeah.
And let's not think about it at all. Let's just sweep it under the carpet and forget anything to do with how we look.
100%.
There's a middle ground of let's not be fixated and create this as an ideology. Let's keep it as a mindset, not an ideology. And also still think about how we look because that's natural, right? But catch ourselves when we're maybe overly and unnecessarily negative or coming into a ground of, okay, now I'm thinking about something that I see as negative to a degree where it's debilitating. Right? I don't want to go outside because I think my waist is too big looking. Oh, that's not too good. Right? Got to catch ourselves in those moments, but there's a middle ground between the two. And I would say between body positivity and neutrality, there's no right answer. There's no middle exactly for any one person. For some people, maybe they're more negative on average in terms of how they look. And maybe being a little bit more positive, encouraging them to be a bit more positive might be the better answer. For other people, it could be on the other end. And, maybe they don't think much about their body. Why should we make them suddenly start thinking super positively all the time about how they look? No, encourage like a positive skew, but not encouraging them to look all the time. So kind of more on the lower, more neutral end of that spectrum, while also recognizing you can never be fully neutral on that.
Absolutely. I completely hear you. We'll take a quick 5-minute break for the cameras and jump
no
back
worries.
into it.
Sounds good.
We're back. Quick break. Sorry about that. Hopefully it doesn't cut out again, but you never know. So something that popped into my mind, you were talking about the mindset. It's better as a mindset instead of a movement. The movement has some of these, parts of it that are a little bit shady. Like maybe we shouldn't necessarily be, be so aggressive with people who don't adopt the ideology of body positivity. But as a mindset for yourself, for particularly people who dwell on their body image, it could be useful. So something that, I don't know if you've seen this at all, but I was watching your TVO documentary there with, I think the guy's name was Kyle. And he was talking about how there's kind of a bit of a difference for men and women, how men body dysmorphia or body image issues are more related to muscularity, whereas for the women, it's more perhaps figure, being slim, being the specific body type in certain ways. And on the body positivity mindset, this is something that I've seen. I don't know. This is just a completely offhand Instagram video I saw, and it was comparing male versus female motivation, or like men's motivation on Instagram versus women's motivation on Instagram. And the women's was like, it was a girl saying, "You're beautiful, you're great, you're a queen, blah blah blah," just like really like hyping up this other girl. And then the men's motivation was like, "You're trash, you're not good enough, you're weak, blah blah blah." And I was like, that's a good point, because I think for guys, at least for me, like specifically, the stuff that gets me off my ass, that gets me out of bed in the morning is thinking about whatever, a certain motivational speech where it's like, if you don't go to the gym, you're a loser. That might be seen as toxic to some people, but I think for a lot of guys that moves them more than perhaps the positive stuff would. So I wonder if you consider at all that difference between like what motivates men versus women. Is there this issue where, men who are perhaps struggling with their body image might benefit more from this harsh, tough love kind of aspect?
The Andrew Tate kind of.
Yeah.
I know I saw one clip from him that was someone posted a reel, and it was like, if you don't own a Ferrari, you're a loser. Interesting take. For sure. For most people who don't own Ferraris. But I would say, like you brought up one point there in terms of concerns being different. Of course, Kyle did bring up muscle dysphoria. So muscle dysphoria is a condition. It's like a subtype of BDD. It's a different type of BDD, but it's a very related disorder. Usually affects men on average much more. Also, proportionately speaking, affects gay men a lot more, interestingly enough. There's been research into that. I'm less familiar with that research, but there has been some research into that. But overwhelmingly, it does affect men. It can affect women, but less common. There was also another study done by a lady named Catherine Phillips, I actually should call her. Really sweet lady. I happen to know her personally. Very influential researcher in body dysmorphic disorder. It was an earlier study, I believe, and she looked at the differences between men and women in body dysmorphic disorders, BDD. And she found that, neurologically speaking, not too many differences. Pretty similar. Symptoms also very similar, not too different from each other. The concerns, though, were different, which you could imagine, right? For men, generally speaking, more muscular. Maybe also in terms of hair, a lot more common than, say, in women. Women might be more commonly, say, their hips. Men are less concerned necessarily about having Kim Kardashian hips than women are. So we saw those, or I'd say the bust even as well for women, particularly. A lot of women have concerns with the bust. So we can see that there are definitely some differences there. And also that also should just come down into different ideals, different, how we're built differently, right? And the ideal of what the ideal man looks like versus the ideal woman being, say, for example, having a large chest, or maybe some women are concerned about having an overly large chest. For men, that's usually less of a concern that we see. Maybe male baldness, a lot more common in men than women, of course. So we see more men generally have concerns about that. But when it comes to the motivation aspect, you definitely have an interesting take on there, for sure. Absolutely, we do see a lot more pressure on men. We see a lot more of that. You gotta get your butt out or else you're nothing, right? See, it's some with women, but a lot more with men. Absolutely. And There's also some, when it comes to the clinical cases, there is some more issue with that there, because when it comes to BDD and treatment with BDD, treating men harshly isn't necessarily going to cure it better. Actually, if anything, it will be a lot worse for them. That same mindset of trying to be a bit more positive is definitely the route that people want to aim for there. But we see men tend to be more underdiagnosed with things like BDD. It's not that it necessarily is occurring less. If you think about it, men think about their body a lot too, and must, like gym bros, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We see them just as much as the Pilates girls out there, right? Just as often. But we don't talk about it as much with men.
Right.
And we don't really recognize it so much with men. And we kind of push men into a bit more of a corner where we say with women, hey, talk about your body positivity, everything.
Right.
But with men, we say, oh, toughen up, get stronger, you know?
Yep.
We see female plus size models. We don't see too many male plus size models.
Right.
I think I might have met about a solid 1, maybe 2 male plus size. And I've met a lot of models. I can't count how many female plus size models I've met. I've met a lot of female plus size models, absolutely. So we see those differences there. And I can't say necessarily that it would be good. Now, why we do that to men and versus women, I'm sure there's a good combo there in terms of sociological things, you know, societal reasons that we've created on our own, but also probably some more inherent things in terms of the hunter-gatherer kind of days, in terms of men got to be out there being tough and strong, so they got to take the psychological punches, quote unquote. Not that I believe that's fully true, that I should be taking psychological punches, but that being said, there's some dynamic there that would definitely encourage both from a sociological view, but also from more of a historical view in terms of why generally we tend to try to motivate men with harsher treatment and women with softer. But in cases like, say, with body image, and particularly when it comes to those with very negative body image on the clinical side too, especially, that's not the right kind of treatment, and it leads to problems.
Okay. Interesting. So that leads me to ask, what does it take? It's very interesting with these like psychiatric disorders. I've talked about on here, I don't want this take to necessarily offend you, but I've talked about on here how I think the DSM-5 is largely a scam, and how I feel that the size, since it's grown so fast over so many years, it feels like some doctors or some clinicians are almost trying to find disorders. And it seems a little bit sketchy to me. So I'm interested genuinely in what are the I guess the qualifiers, or what does it take for someone to actually be diagnosed with body dysphoria or BDD, like you said, a body dysmorphic disorder. Sorry. What does it actually take for someone to be diagnosed with that?
Yeah, so there is a whole outline there on the DSM-5 in terms of checklists and markers. Really, I can say that BDD, generally speaking, and it's a type of OCD. We used to think it was basically OCD and used to treat it as though it was OCD, and we later found that's not good. Once again, a former flaw at the DSM-5 in saying that we can just, supposedly treat BDD like OCD. And some people actually still try to push that to this day, and it's quite harmful. But it involves the fixation on perceived flaws that either don't exist at all or are so small in comparison to what they actually are. So a good analogy I like to use is say I have a bit of a bump on my nose that used to bug me some. So say it does actually exist for me, but let's pretend I really saw that as like a massive bump. I thought the first thing when you look at me that you see is this bump that exists right here. First thing. That's not actually the case. That's kind of characteristic of BDD. Or possibly, let's pretend it didn't exist at all. I could perceive there to be a bump when there is none. And there is in this case, but pretend there is none. I could perceive it.
I can barely even see it. I can barely see it myself. So
we tend to notice things much more in ourselves on average. For BDD people, it's a lot more. It's definitely like focusing right in and thinking that affects their whole physical appearance. And a lot of people with BDD, they'll either be preoccupied with checking the mirror, seeing, does this feature look okay on me? Do I look fine? Am I okay right now? Do I need to fix something? Do I need to wear something? Spending a lot of time doing that. Or, interestingly enough, avoiding the mirror because they find the mirror distressing. So I don't want to look at any mirrors. It paranoids me. I want to avoid mirrors at all costs, right? So we see different characteristics that are at play there that are generally outlined in the DSM-5, but It is interesting that you mentioned about the flaws of the DSM-5 because there's definitely flaws. There absolutely is. And I like to look at it mainly from a cultural perspective and its flaws. So a while back, I actually did a literature review. It was for a class, but I found it really insightful. And I did actually mention this. I think I mentioned it in my first TED Talk. Don't quote me. I mentioned it somewhere. Yeah. About studies that were done in different countries in body image, as well as, say, in Japan. Japan was a really interesting one specifically. There was one guy, forget his name. Oh, I wish I could cite him. He had so many studies, particularly on the body image of young Japanese women.
Yeah.
Quite informative, very interesting stuff. So we could see that generally speaking, women in Japan had more of a desire to be thin than, say, women in America. Women in Japan generally had a more negative body image than women in America.
Yep.
They generally were more concerned with their body image than women in America. But rates of anorexia were far lower in Japan than in America. That doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
Makes no sense if you think about it, very widely speaking. I mean, sure, just because someone thinks negatively about themselves and has a desire to be very skinny doesn't necessarily mean automatically they're going to have anorexia nervosa.
Yep.
But it makes you think a little bit. You know, those seem like some factors that would play in line with anorexia.
100%.
So why do we see that there's no rate there?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a condition there in Japan that exists that's more culturally appropriate that we don't outline in the DSM-5.
Right.
We just overlook and we say, oh, if you have anorexia, we'll diagnose you. And if you have something else, but it's not in the DSM, well, that's too bad for you. You just don't quite meet the qualifications and you're not going to get care for that. You're not going to get full treatment for that.
Yeah.
And it is absurd in some ways that someone could meet so many criteria and be basically subclinical. So not quite at the clinical level, but just maybe missing out on one criteria there on the checklist of the DSM-5.
Yeah.
And you don't have the condition exactly.
Yeah.
It is quite interesting how that can work. So there is some validity to DSM, absolutely, but then there is some blurred lines for sure. And when it comes to different disorders, there's different reasons for those blurred lines and where they exist, absolutely. But when it comes to body image, a lot of it is culturally. A lot of it's the differences between cultures that we don't understand. Another interesting area in the world is Gambia, West Africa, where ideals are to be much bigger for women.
Absolutely.
More voluptuous.
Yep.
Sadly, we don't have much research going on in Gambia, West Africa. So, not the biggest population in the world either. So we don't quite have research on what the rates are there for different eating disorders, perception, all those things. We have some studies on perception, how they see themselves, and knowing those ideals as well. But it would be really interesting to see more about that, and particularly maybe there's something else there that we don't look at from the Western perspective. And how could that be applicable more broadly speaking in terms of how we see body image and how we see disorders in the DSM-5?
Absolutely. It's very interesting. I think the thing that stays consistent across cultures is obviously this, not obsession, but it's clear that specifically for women, can I ask, is BDD more prevalent with women than it is men, just overall?
So it's underdiagnosed in general.
Okay.
It's particularly underdiagnosed in men.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can't quite give a fully accurate estimate. I believe, I don't want to misquote here, but I believe it's thought to be pretty similar.
Okay.
But we don't recognize it as much so in men.
Got it. So it's harder, perhaps it's harder to pick up or harder to detect.
Yeah, or people might not come in for treatment, say, if they're men and they're struggling with this, that might still be more that suck it up kind of mindset going on there.
Absolutely. Like toughen it. Yeah. Tough love for sure. So, okay. Interesting. I think across cultures, definitely, at least what we're willing to talk about is the female body image, let's say. Yeah. And there are different standards, like you said, across cultures. And I think the common theme across the world is fitness. So I'm going to take the evolutionary perspective. In Mexico, so I'm half Mexican. My dad grew up in Mexico, and he was telling me how, well, this is pretty common knowledge, I'm sure, but the body type, the more favorable body type in Mexico is a little bit chunkier, is a little bit bigger than perhaps we have here in Canada or the US, because the idea is that if you're too skinny, it's seen as like you're probably malnourished because, there's higher poverty in Mexico than there is in Canada or the US. You wouldn't think of a skinny person in Canada or the US as malnourished because that's not a huge issue here. Whereas like you said, perhaps even in Gambia or other African countries, Mexico, or just these poor places, skinnier is seen as malnourished. If you're bigger, you're good to have a baby, basically. If you're frail and on the brink of death, you might not be able to produce. So I think the common theme here is about fitness and that the fact that so many people, men and women, care about their body image. For me, it has, like, once again, from an evolutionary perspective, it seems like it's a pretty important thing. So I'm trying to find this right balance of how do we not obsess over it, but how do we actually fully understand the importance of a good body image, of like a good, I guess, a good figure or a good being in good shape so that we're desired by people. Not to say that we need to obsess over being desired by others, but if everyone around you is saying that no one wants to be anywhere near you in a relationship, no one wants to have kids with you because of these specific reasons, absolutely, that's harsh. I'm not saying it's fair, but I think that confronting the issue is a little bit more helpful than trying to hide away from it. So this is basically just all to ask, how much value do you think is, like, how much of a person's value should be determined by their physical features?
Yeah, I know that's definitely something that's been, in terms of what you're mentioning too, in different countries, there's different ideals that are going on there. And also it sometimes depends on the poverty level. And if we look you were mentioning anthropologically speaking, if you look back at the Venus figurine, so it's kind of our first depiction ever of a body ideal. It was not marketed. The marketed one was the Gibson girl. That was our first depiction there. It was a Western one. You can see they were very corseted in. They had that very pinup doll look to them. But the very first ideal was the Venus figurine, which was made by both humans and Neanderthals, actually. So that's how far back we're going.
There you go.
And she was a big, curvy lady.
She
was very voluptuous.
Absolutely.
And the reason, most likely, was exactly what you were saying. Back then, it's a little harder to get food. So for that case in the caveman days, it wasn't necessarily poverty. It was just more we were hunter-gatherers, limited resources. So to have a voluptuous body, you're clearly surviving, you're doing well. So that was the ideal there. We saw that also in terms of poverty and wealth, being bigger being a sign of wealth in ancient China. That's why you look at many ancient Chinese paintings, depictions, drawings of women being much bigger, because that is a wealthy woman. That is an ideal woman there.
Absolutely.
And we see it very differently. Then we have the 1990s heroin chick in the United States, which is just a totally different world away.
100%.
Something that ancient China would probably scream and run from. So it's definitely changed over time. And I would say in terms of how we value body image, there's a range to which what is healthy and what is unhealthy. And of course, there's some extremes at the end where we can say objectively, it's likely not healthy. It's likely not healthy for your body to be a certain way on either end of the extremes. But then there's also a middle ground within that range where some people are a little bit bigger, some people are a bit smaller, some people have bigger hips, smaller hips, bigger or smaller in general, and they're still considered healthy. BMI is a flawed measure, of course, but it's flawed for other reasons, right? Like, muscle weight, how do we calculate that in there? So it's a very simplified measure. But what we see as healthy and what we define as healthy can really be not particularly one ideal. Right? And that's why we see people have different kinds of attractions. Some people don't really care for big hips. Some people like small hips. Right? Some people see that as more attractive. Victoria's Secret supermodels obviously had the smaller hips, right?
Absolutely.
Many people thought they were gorgeous. I sure did when I was a little girl. And many men did as well, too. But then also there's many men who like Kim Kardashian, for example. Many men who are not into Kim Kardashian, many who are. Right? We see a whole range there. And vice versa can go for women with men in terms of different features as well. So I can't definitively say there is one ideal. And of course, it's something that in terms of attraction is very integrated into what you like. There's probably reasons all the way back, you know, to your childhood, to some probably primitive things as well, to an extent that we all have, you know, like say clear skin. Clear skin's one of my favorite examples. We used to think that it was indicative of, say, a skin infection, and that, you know, if you have a pimple, it's kind of more, you know, likely that you have a skin infection, so you should not, you know, exactly, like you're not as I guess healthy, quote unquote, even though that's not true whatsoever if you have a pimple.
Right.
It's the same kind of logic as, say, a cat being scared of a cucumber because primitively they associate it with a snake.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So we see a pimple, we think it's bad. We don't think a pimple is a skin infection or that means we're unhealthy. Not at all. One pimple, we all get them, right?
Yeah.
But primitively, we start thinking about that, right?
Very
we're like, oh,
interesting.
you know? So we have those underlyings there, but I would say there's no one necessarily full ideal, and the ideals have always changed based on what's on trend. I think there's deeper reasons why there's ideals out there in terms of a marketing perspective and wanting to shift what we see as in and in vogue versus what's not in and in vogue.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do want to ask about that, just a bit about how, like, maybe there is somewhat of a role to be played by, let's say, the culture's idea of the ideal body type. We'll get back into it. We could do another quick break.
No worries. All good.
And then jump back into it. Okay. Hopefully we're okay this time.
No worries.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. So I was telling you about Ronda Rousey. That's what I was talking about. Yeah. And they're asking her about the sexualization of Wonder Woman, how she's got, like, whatever, these big boobs, and she's got this curved waist and all this type of thing. And I was surprised to hear she was like, yeah, I mean, look at Thor and Captain America. Like, they've got the chiseled abs and the rock hard, you know, pecs and big biceps and all this kind of thing. It's like, it's just a trait for superheroes. You know, they have a common characteristic. Like, I can't think of many superheroes who you look at and, like, find objectively unattractive. Most of them, you know, look great because they're meant to serve as kind of an aspiring figure. You're supposed to look at them and be like, oh, I want to be like Captain America. I want to be like Thor. I want to be like Wonder Woman. It's someone to kind of, I would say, maybe model yourself after, or like maybe even try to, you know, chase that goal or that image in a way that's, you know, healthy, knowing that obviously this is a fake superhero character in a movie with perfect lighting and editing and Photoshop probably, right? But you know, they still serve their role. Kids love superheroes. So what do you think is the role of like the cultural ideal body image? Like, can it be useful? Can it serve as kind of a goal to strive towards, while, you know, not completely detrimenting everybody's mental health?
Yeah, so that's actually funny. I never heard of that with the superheroes, especially as someone who grew up as the biggest Marvel fan.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. Superheroes were made to be like an ideal figure in all aspects. Ideal person, you know, helpful, kind, caring, strong, looks amazing. Just the ideal person right there. Captain America or Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, right?
Right.
Wonder Woman too, absolutely. The thing is, when it comes to ideals, is that there are elements of it that, yes, you know, we do see as, I guess from an adaptive point of view, very like healthy and good. But then there's also elements in there that are more so created, or more so artificial, per se, and we pair them up together. So I believe I kind of mentioned this more so, I talked about this a lot in my third TED Talk, but I think I possibly mentioned it before in another one. I'm kind of forgetting, to be honest, but this idea of manufactured exclusivity. Yeah. And basically when I kind of coined that term, what I meant was, we pair these features that we innately see as attractive, so that could be that clear skin, right? For example, with features that basically have no basis for being seen as attractive, like say high cheekbones, right? Are you healthier with high cheekbones? Probably not. It doesn't really make a difference. Yeah. It's not unhealthy to have high cheekbones. It's not healthy to have them either. It's just that neutral ground. Yeah. And we take all these ambiguous features and pair them with things that we innately see as attractive to kind of create an ideal that's a little bit harder to attain. And then we market it to people. So I'll take it back to the Victoria's Secret model there. For example, she's extremely tall. Is tall necessarily more adaptive? and not really. But, you know, she does have features like clear skin. She has full hair, seen as a sign of health. Lovely hair going on there, right?
Yeah.
Different feminine features that we've, you know, been primed to see as attractive, paired with these ambiguous high hollow cheekbones, extremely tall, a certain proportion of leg length to torso length, which we see in modeling as well. And there's no basis for those, but we do it to kind of make them a little more exclusive while also showing that, yes, they are a real person. Yeah, sure, the superhero isn't real, but Scarlett Johansson's a real person.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
hey. And we do that. We use all the Photoshop and all the lighting. And I've heard apparently, now I don't know, but I've heard apparently even like on the spot injections, say, for
Interesting.
example, like fillers just for certain lighting. And of course, fillers can be dissolved. So they would put that in for the given lighting and the given scene and then possibly dissolve that, right, on hand. I've never worked on a movie set, so I don't know if that's exactly true. But that's what I've heard. I'd believe anything. I do know lighting can make a huge difference. As a beauty pageant girl, I know there's a lot of tips and tricks we all do, from the corsets built in our gowns sometimes to make the waists right tiny. Or I've even seen girls backstage, I can't do this, but it's incredible, fully contour six-packs abs onto themselves and leg muscles.
Jeez.
Amazing. Really interesting. Quite a
Wild.
talent. And they don't have abs
Yeah,
themselves, but they've
drawn
managed to
on.
do that. It's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
cool. It's quite an artwork, I will say.
Yeah.
And undoubtedly in movies, of course, they're the pros at that. They're not even just a beauty pageant girl on their own.
Right.
They got a whole team there for themselves to do things like that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to how these ideals were created, it's pretty ambiguous and it shifts a lot over time. And the reason why it shifts is really for more so of the getting you to purchase things, getting you in a loop, right? So say, for example, in the 50s, we had Marilyn Monroe. And then suddenly, in the 60s, we switched to Twiggy. Marilyn
Right.
Monroe being more curvy, totally healthy, to Twiggy, also healthy, but very slender. You know, a very small hip to waist ratio. Marilyn Monroe, definitely the opposite. Very large hip to waist ratio going on.
Yep.
And then we transitioned back and forth and back and forth. We went to Cindy Crawford, who was a little bit more of a curvier type. Definitely slender, but a little more curvier. Back to Paris Hilton,
Yep.
back to Kim Kardashian. And we kind of get these people in this loop of, you know, say, yes, I want to wear this certain product that's going to make my hips look small and squeeze me in. Actually, no, now I want to wear pads on my hips and change it up a bit. And we get them in this kind of purchasing cycle of, I need to chase this thing, I need to chase that thing.
Interesting.
And the thing is with products, if they're good, they'll get you a little bit closer to that area
Yeah,
of, you know, looking more like that Victoria's Secret model with the push-up bra,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Or buying into, say, a certain fitness product probably might help you, for example, to an extent. But it doesn't actually get you exactly there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
You'll never exactly look like that curated image off that model. Your hair won't exactly shine like the advertisement does. Might be shinier, but it won't get you there.
Right.
But if you bought another one or used a bit more product, you know, you
Yeah,
could
yeah.
be closer, you could be closer. And it gets you kind of in that loop until they change up the ideal. And now we're on a different ideal. Now you don't want to have the push-up bra. You actually want to be smaller because you want to look thin. Oh, wow. Now suddenly you need to get a different type of bra that's
Yep.
going to make you look small. Oh, wow. And buy into that one now and throw out all your old ones until that trend comes back and repurchase.
Absolutely.
So it's manufactured in such a way that, yes, there are features that we innately see as attractive that exist there. Oh, for sure. But we pair them with ambiguous features to kind of create this very limited ideal. It's like when you look in a search engine in Google and you put in several features, and you say, you know, you want high cheekbones, you want this and that, you want this shape of body, you know, you want this certain height. The pool of people that you're going to find that have all those features together is smaller and smaller. It's like if you're looking on Google and you're looking for the word cheese and then you put in quotes and then you put cheese and bread. Well, there's going to be a lot less things that come up. And then you put in cheese, bread, and a kettle. Okay, well, your search pool is going to be a lot smaller for what articles come up or pages that have all those words.
Yeah.
Same thing with human beings. If we ask many features, the amount of people that have all of those features at once becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
So we get people to try to chase those ideals because nobody naturally seems to have all of them at once.
Yeah, it's very true. I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying, because this is the stuff that I've talked about in the past. I can cite the episode. I think it's episode 56. I was talking about it with my friend Justin Spears, and I was basically just saying how we were talking about body positivity and how originally body positivity served as like kind of a self-defense mechanism for these girls who have been pushed like all of this so much like pressure. It got overwhelming that they're like, using body positivity as a shield. And I understand it. Yeah. Now, okay, so there's a few things I want to ask. So
Absolutely.
first, you were saying how like they manipulate kind of the ideal woman to get you into buying cycles.
Yeah.
How do they do that? Like, because when you think of kind of, I guess the community, let's say like the population's, ideal woman, like you said, whether it's Cindy Crawford or Kim Kardashian, how do, I guess, are you saying it's businesses? Like, how do these businesses necessarily manage to shift the needle of so many people's perspectives? This is what I'm kind of wondering. Like, does it happen, like, perhaps does it happen more organically? Is it like the people themselves just like something different? Or do you think it's actually the businesses are finding a way to change people's preferences?
To put it bluntly, I don't think it's organic.
Okay.
My fourth talk, which was actually where I kind of talked more about the creation of that ideal and everything, was actually called The Psychology of the Supermodel. And that is exactly kind of what it was in a sense. Now, we weren't actually looking at what supermodels think of themselves and whatever.
Yeah.
But we were looking more so at, say, how are these ideals created? Why were they created?
Yeah.
And I'll take you on a little journey back to the Gibson Girl era. So that was at the turn of the century. We were coming out of the Victorian era and going into a new society where a middle class started to emerge. In the Victorian era, we had an upper and lower. We didn't have much of a middle, right? And this man named Charles Dana Gibson created what we called the Gibson Girl. And she was an illustration of the perfect ideal woman. She wasn't an actual person. She had this pompadour hair, big curly hair and an updo, this corseted waist. She wore long skirts. She played golf. She was very prissy, proper. She had like 7 kids at the same time while being prissy and proper and very wealthy and everything in between, but also was wearing things that the middle class could wear. So she was marketing to the middle class.
Right.
She was realistic, but she also was not at the same time. Right? People could buy what she was wearing, use the product she was using, but they couldn't necessarily keep up with, say, doing golf and tennis and raising 7 children and also being leisurely at the exact same time. It would be kind of impossible, right? So they created this ideal, and they marketed the products to people saying, like, you'll be more like the Gibson Girl if you use this. You'll look more like her, and this is the ideal, and we're putting her in newspapers and magazines and getting her out there.
Yeah.
Then when we shifted into another one, to the next generation, we use different kind of ideals. And when it comes to those, it really breaks down into the ideal we are creating and putting out there, the celebrity image, right? So many people would argue that the first kind of face, I would say, to an ideal would be the flapper girl. And, she was a real human being. Gibson girls were not a real human being. Flapper girls were in the 20s. But then if we go to individuals, which we eventually got to, it'd be more closely to, like, say, Marilyn Monroe, who was seen as that beauty ideal of the 50s there.
Yeah.
And then from that point onwards, we started seeing these individual celebrities that we were saying, yes, this is the ideal. This is the ideal. That's the ideal. So I really think it comes down to utilizing, say, celebrity figures, promoting them on the basis of looks. Of course, we know there are many celebrities out there that we don't necessarily say they're famous for a particular reason, such as music, but more so in terms of beauty, attraction, appearance. How did they get there? Why were they chosen? There's many beautiful people in the world. Why were they chosen?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more than one reason out there, right? We can manufacture people to look however way. We can give anybody plastic surgery, it's true. So surely there's more than just that behind it. But there was definitely, for each celebrity out there that was the ideal, particular reasons behind why they wanted to bring that celebrity in vogue, why that celebrity was pushed to become in vogue and the new beauty ideal trend out there.
100%.
So I definitely think, aside from the features that we see as innately attractive, the ones that we are inserting in there and saying, this is attractive, no, that's attractive, no, the opposite thing's now attractive, definitely comes down more so to a manufactured perspective.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, because I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. What do you think that in 2025,
Yeah.
We're in 2025. Who do you think is that ideal figure today?
Ooh, that one's challenging.
It's a good question. It's a good.
That's a good one.
I'm sure all the guys listening to this right now would be like screaming their answers. But for you, what do you think?
For women,
what do you think young girls are comparing themselves to today?
Oh, definitely. When it comes to, I would say publications like the Daily Mail definitely show a lot of particular women and promote them. I would say there's no one particular woman out there, but there's a few different individual celebrities that they might be promoting and a certain look they're promoting.
Yeah.
I feel like right here and now in 2025, we've kind of shifted into more, and maybe it's because of politics. Actually, I wouldn't be shocked if it's because of politics in some part, and politically in the US too, especially. Going back almost to the ideal of slender, Ozempic,
Yeah.
but also curvy at the same time. So
Yeah.
still the Kardashians are in vogue, absolutely. But we're seeing, say, for example, if you look at the Kardashians, you see how their bodies have changed more recently? Generally gotten a lot skinnier. Now, of course, there's the whole Ozempic trend going on. I'm not going to say yay or nay as to whether they're doing it. Of course, I don't know. But undoubtedly, there is some talk going on there in terms of, yes, these drugs are, say, in trend. Yes, the style's in trend. Yes, we also want to shift this ideal and market products to this ideal and
Yep.
create more, waist shapers that fit this ideal, of course, and kind of shift society to being more attracted to this and thinking this is better. So it appears that they're taking that same kind of Kardashian-esque curvy body,
Yeah.
but make it skinnier and making that the ideal. And I feel like that's what we're seeing a lot more. Now,
Okay.
in different industries, different things, right? Still, if you look at the high fashion industry, definitely that heroin chick, it's still in trend.
Yeah.
But not for everything, right? If you look, say, at different forms of modeling, and maybe you're looking more at an industry that's looking more at bikini modeling, then you're getting more Kardashian, right?
Yeah.
So it all really depends. When you're on the runway, it's heroin chick still, but there's a little bit of variety going on. So that's why it's like, ooh, hard to say exactly what. But I would say on average, if you're looking through Daily Mail, that kind of curvy, but getting more to the slender point is what is seemingly to be promoted right now.
Okay. And so there might be people listening to this
Yeah.
who are, familiar with the Daily Mail, kind of who they were
Yes.
talking about. But for me, I don't know the Daily Mail. I want to
Yeah.
ask you if you had to give 2-3 names that are these people, because once again, I don't know who the Daily Mail promotes. If you for people to visualize, if they had to Google it, be like, okay, this is what's going on today in 2025.
Ooh, I want to remember their names. Well, there was one golfer. There's one golfer.
Yeah.
Oh, her first name's Paige.
Okay. Paige Golf. Just look it up.
Paige Spiranek, I think.
Okay.
I think that's her name. Then, of course, there's the gymnast.
Yeah.
Gymnast girl. I forget her name fully
Okay.
entirely.
Okay. Yeah.
Blonde gymnast girl goes to university in the States. They talk about her a lot. Those are two big ones that you see a lot on there.
Yeah.
You also just see the general celebrities like the Kardashians still
Yeah.
on there a lot too. You'll see, yeah, sometimes you'll see things about Cindy Crawford's daughter, who definitely has a different look than those other girls. She's definitely more of the runway model heroine chick, but
Yeah.
she's also still actually quite promoted on Daily Mail as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, you see a lot of those kind of general figures. Many athletic women, for sure, but not necessarily a body ideal that all athletic women embody. It's a little bit more of a Kardashianized athletic that's made to be a little bit thinner than the typical athletic and a lot more Kardashianized than the typical athletic.
I hear you. Okay, interesting. So for you personally,
Yes.
being, someone who's gone up through this stream, you did Miss Canada, you have been doing fashion shows. How do you get to that point as somebody who struggles with body dysmorphic disorder? How it seems like someone who has body dysmorphia would want to stray as far away from things like beauty pageants and fashion shows, but you're head first into it. Why have you been able to get yourself into there despite these battles?
It's a popular question.
Yeah.
I've joked with my friends and I've said, they know about that question, of course, and I've joked with them and I said, masochism. Exactly. But no, not exactly there. I would say for me, a lot of it is, I grew up a dancer, right? I was on stage and then I did theater as a kid. I loved performing. I loved being on stage, being out there.
Yeah.
Yes, body image is one of those things. For a lot of people with BDD, they want to be more hidden. They don't want to be showing off And that, sometimes I did want to be hidden. That is very true. But for me, I did have a lot of that, not every case looks the same. Not everybody's textbook, right? And for me, I always was a performer, and I always loved being out on stage. I loved performing. It energized me. I never got as nervous of performing as I did, say, talking to someone on the street. I had social anxiety, ironically, but I still loved performing. They can't talk back to you. They can throw a banana, but they're not going to talk back. So why do I care, right? So I loved being on stage. After COVID, I stopped with the ballet, and I just got into a loop, and I wasn't really myself. I wasn't, I didn't feel like myself. I had many life transitions happen at once. Some people I loved who passed away, and just people in my life that changed around, some too, and just growing with age, and then also being isolated too. I couldn't perform on stage, I couldn't dance or anything. And I remember feeling really down on myself. Felt so down on myself. I went through a breakup at the time too, and I just felt like it was my first relationship. I was like, nothing's ever gonna work out for me in life, hey? Not true, but you get that kind of teenage girl mindset going on there, right? Yeah. And I believe I was in South Carolina at the time, and I turned on the TV, and up came the Miss South Carolina beauty pageant there. And I was looking at these girls, and I was like, oh, hey, they're on the TV, they're walking, they're on stage, they're speaking too, and they're showing talents. Isn't that cool? I love speaking. I did theater growing up. That's something I would love to do. It's not as injurious as dance either, but you have a talent component, which is awesome. And it just seemed like something that, maybe this would motivate me to get back into myself and back into who I am. Because I really felt like I was a very feminine girl growing up, and I felt like I really lost that part of me. I felt like, this might bring me back into who I am. Yeah. Right? Bring me into myself again and empower me to improve myself.
Absolutely.
So, and it did exactly that, I will say. It definitely did. So I got into beauty pageants. I went for Miss International Canada, which is owned by the Miss Universe Canada organization. Amazing time there. Yeah. Met a lot of really cool people. That was one of the best parts that you generally don't even think about. But the people you're quote unquote competing against, a lot of them are really cool. You meet them, you make friends there with all these amazing women who are doing these really cool things in life. Yeah. Incredible experience, and many of them, strong majority of them, I still talk to this day.
There you go.
It's amazing. And then I ended up going for Miss Canada later on. And somewhere in between there, I got involved with modeling. Many girls in pageants do modeling too. It's kind of related, right? It's different but similar. You do a runway walk, you do a pageant walk. They're different, but on the outside, they're quite similar. They're related to each other. So 100%. I figured, you know what, I'm going to apply for a fashion show. International Fashion Encounter by Toronto Fashion Academy was my first professional one. Before that was UTM charity fashion show that I went to. I realized I loved walking the runway back then. That was way before I did a beauty pageant too. So that also kind of was a bit of motivation for me to go for the beauty pageant. So I just started applying to runways, started getting into them. That beauty ideal definitely exists on the runway, for sure. And it's something I've had to grapple with. Absolutely. And for some people, my body is exactly what they were looking for. They want someone who is, say, I'm not a plus size model, I'm more mid-size, I got some curves on me, and they're like, yes, we wanted exactly that. I have a smaller waist, like, yes, for this dress, perfect. That's what we wanted. Yeah. You fill it out right. For others, no. And that's just the name of the game. That's how it goes. Yeah. But I feel like for myself, I'm at a point in my life where if something negative comes at me, I'll be able to handle it well.
That's good.
I know I have that strength in me at this point in my life. I didn't always, but at this point, I know I'd be able to handle it well. And I always wanted to be a model. When I was a little girl, I looked at those Victoria's Secret supermodels and I said, oh, I want to be like, I want to do that. I want to be very smart and academic, but I also want to be like those Victoria's Secret models at the exact same time. That's my dream, I used to think to myself, my mom was very academic, very smart lady. I thought, I want to be like her, just like her. I also want to walk runways too.
That's awesome.
So that was my ideal.
Yeah.
So when it came the time for me to get into that industry, I was like, I want to be that person that can show that younger girl who's also looking at the runways, who's like me and didn't see someone who looked like her, that, there's a space for you here if you want to be here.
Yeah.
You can occupy a space here. You have every right to. And if this is your shtick, you belong here. And if it's not, that's okay. I'm still going to walk here, and I can represent you, and you can see these clothes on someone who looks like you.
Yeah.
Also was a common pain growing up, too, looking on, different sites and saying, oh, I don't know how that would look on someone who has my body shape, right?
Right.
So I could be that for them, but I could also show other young women that, hey, yes, there is a space for you here. And if you want to pursue it, by all means, you have every right to give it a go, give it a try, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. So with balancing things like, academic success and, being a runway model, traditionally people would categorize, academics with, as a more masculine endeavor, whereas a runway model is a more feminine endeavor.
Yes.
And with something like this, for example, like I consider like talking to different guests and podcasting for me has often been, it's easier now, but at times it's like you have to be very open because you have to be able to talk to people and actually, consider their different points of view. Obviously, everyone has their own beliefs, their own values, their views of the world, and being in my seat where you talk to different people every single week, you have to open yourself a little bit to genuinely consider the other side of things, to genuinely consider other people's points of view and their opinions, because if you don't, you're going to be a pretty shitty interviewer, it's going to be,
absolutely.
It's going to be a little bit challenging. So for me, like being so open has been a bit of a challenge. Like for me, I think that's also something that I'd also consider a bit more with the masculine versus the feminine, men tend to be a little bit more like, their role in society has traditionally been, to protect and to say no to strange ideas or strangers. These are my people. I don't know you, so it's a little bit more defensive. Whereas I think that I don't know if you could necessarily say that openness is more feminine. I don't know if they've done any studies on that personality wise, but for me, balancing those two of being personality wise a little bit more perhaps to myself or not very easily open is a way I'd characterize myself. It's been a challenge to kind of balance those things. So for you, the reason I'm going to bring this up is that do you ever consider it challenging to be someone who is successful in two kind of very opposite fields, like things like academics versus something like fashion?
Absolutely. Time-wise, yes. Absolutely is a struggle. I don't sleep much. That's not a bragging point. I'm often tired. It's not that I shouldn't be sleeping much. It's just literally insomnia. But that being said, absolutely, it can be a struggle. But at the same time, we all have different features of ourselves, and we're not necessarily one boxed up package of we fit this academic ideal and that's the only thing we're good at, right? There's many people who are academic who are also more social and they balance their time well, right? They don't just spend all that social time partying, but they balance it out pretty decently.
Right.
And that's how you see some really great businessmen, for example, who are smart academically, but also very social and knew how to talk to people.
100%.
Right? So we all have our little areas and also, of course, our strengths and weaknesses there too. For me, it really came a lot down to the fact that I loved performing. Psychology, of course, if you're in research, you can, go to conferences, speak at conferences, right? If you're bestowed that opportunity, which of course does not happen on the daily or every weekend. Like runway shows happen during high season every weekend for sure. During low season, every couple weekends. Definitely more often than research conferences.
Right, yeah.
Or TEDx talks, same deal. A lot more common than them.
100%.
But it really, for me, it was about a fulfillment. I knew for myself that if I was not out there performing on stage, if I was not, running around doing these other things where I could take my mind off academics occasionally, I'd burn out. At the same time, if I only did runway modeling and was purely focused on that, I would also get burnt out of that, I feel, too, if I didn't have that academic balance. And sometimes things are not 100% in life. Sometimes I feel down when it's like runway modeling. It's like, I didn't get cast in this thing. Oh, I didn't fit, whatever, this dress. I was too short for this dress, things like that. Then I think to myself, anyways, I'm going back to the lab tomorrow. I have work to do. And some things there are going really great.
Absolutely.
If things are not going great, say research-wise, for example, or in any other sense academically, you can always say, well, you know what? I have these other outlets. And yes, for me, academics comes first and foremost. At the same time, there's other things I can use to kind of empower myself, to continue to get better, to continue to improve, while also balancing those two aspects of my life, right? When I wasn't performing, I felt like there was something missing.
100%.
And there's never been a point where I haven't been in academics, so I can't say for sure, but I could pretty pretty accurately, I'm sure, imagine that I would feel quite empty if I didn't have any kind of academic pursuit in my life
That's
as well.
fair.
And we all have those different little balances. Some people hate performing, some people love other things. It's all about balancing it out.
Absolutely. And that's what I think is very interesting about you. It's very unique, is that I don't know if most people would be able to say that, like, innately inside of them, there's this desire to balance very opposite things. So, like, just off the top of my head, I would guess that when you're at one of these research conferences, the demographic, like when you just look at the crowd of people that you're interacting with there, is very different from the people you interact with at the fashion shows.
Definitely.
Am I right in saying that?
Definitely, yeah. Research conferences, it can kind of vary. Like I did one, I wasn't actually talking about research at this particular one, but it was a conference where research was kind of discussed some. It was BDD conference, and most of the people in the audience, this was actually a Zoom one, so that made it even more interesting because many people with BDD, they don't want to necessarily show their faces. Some do. Some are not concerned about that. Others are.
Yeah.
So you got a bunch of the people who wouldn't come in person because they would be too nervous to.
Right.
You also got people from different parts of the world, mainly from UK and America.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, very interesting. And of course, that audience is very different than, say, the modeling community. When you look at researchers too, when there's conferences with many different academics, definitely a different audience as well.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that, say, models understand in terms of body image that necessarily the researchers might not, and certain things that researchers obviously understand that maybe the models don't as well. Mm-hmm. There's also been many studies on body image in models. I know the lab I'm currently at, I haven't been involved in any of these studies. It was more previously when I was much younger, did research on, say, models and their body perception and people with body dysmorphic disorder and their accuracy in terms of how they perceive themselves, right? So there's definitely things that I feel like both populations could kind of learn from each other. Yeah. And, I know there's that kind of assumption of like, oh, academic superiority, especially in the academic community. But as someone who's done both, I don't see models or modeling or people who are in modeling as any kind of less than those who are in academics.
Yeah.
Different skill set, different values that come through, and many women who are in modeling who are also academics that I've met also very interestingly. Especially when you get to those pageant queen girls, some of them are insanely ambitious. But PhDs, MBAs, doctors too, like the whole 9 routes there. But it's definitely a different audience, but yet you learn different things from being in different crowds of equal value.
I would imagine,
and for sure.
And for you, like I feel like it might take someone who's kind of part of both crowds to be able to truly appreciate what each side has to bring to the table.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like it would be hard for someone who's just a naturally born academic. They think purely logically. I wouldn't even say considering, but perhaps they can't think very artistically. Like they just don't have that ability. It would be hard for them to appreciate something that is more artistic. Same with the other side. Someone who's purely artistic isn't going to be able to look at all the researchers in their suits at this conference and see the value in that. They just think it's boring. They're like, what's fun about that? It's like, it's very different things that they have going for them. But no, it's awesome. Victoria, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been an amazing time and so lovely speaking to you today. Absolutely.
It was a great conversation. Do you have any final thoughts, any last words you want to share with the audience before we sign out?
Oh, this is always the toughest section for me. I know. I'm that person at the end of the interview who's like, do you have any questions? I will in 15 minutes from now when the call ends. I would say, you know what? Body image is a really complex thing. Academia is also a very scary thing, and so is balancing different facets of life, right? But at the end of the day, it's all about adapting to what works best for you, right? Like we just talked about before. Say, for example, whether it comes to body image, whether it comes to your mindset, whether it comes to what you view as ideal for yourself, and whether it comes to even, balancing your lifestyle, right? Balancing, hey, I'm passionate about this thing, passionate about that thing. How do I balance it? It all comes down to you as an individual and as a person. So I guess, funny enough, I never really thought that was going to be one theme of our conversation, but I feel like actually throughout, it's kind of a theme that we're getting at here, and it's an important thing.
100%. Maybe trust your gut, trust yourself. And I guess the main thing is just work to improve. We're always trying to make ourselves better, and it can be hard sometimes holding yourself to such a high standard, but just stay in the fight. Keep at it, because I'm sure it'll lead to a good place.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Victoria
Thank you.
Gracie. Ladies and gentlemen, you can follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vic. Can you plug your Instagram?
Yeah,
Where
my
can people find you?
Instagram is at the Victoria Gracie. You can find me there. I usually post on Instagram specifically, but I also have other pages I have LinkedIn too that you can find me at. Of course, my name is Victoria Gracie. You can just probably find me through there. I go to U of T. You'll find me easily there.
Yeah.
So those are my two main areas, but especially Instagram, which is the Victoria Gracie.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is episode 100 something, maybe
100 something.
101.
Ooh.
101. That would be awesome. So you could follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vic, and we will see you next Sunday. Peace out.